Imagine settling into your flight headphones on mind on your destination. Suddenly whispers turn to stares. You're singled out, your character assassinated mid-air by a nervous passenger and an overzealous flight attendant. For Dr. Elijah Vance, this nightmare became terrifyingly real. Accused of being suspicious simply for existing while black, he found himself at the mercy of escalating paranoia. But when this highly respected cybersecurity expert was escorted off the plane by Homeland Security, her body on board Flight 714 from Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta, knew the accused man held a secret that would not only clear his name, but expose a gaping vulnerability, grounding far more than just their travel plans. Get ready. The hum of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was a familiar symphony to Dr. Elijah Vance. Gate B32 was bustling a microcosm of humanity eager to reach Miami for myriad reasons: sun-drenched vacations, crucial business meetings, poignant family reunions. Elijah, a lean man in his late 30s with a neatly trimmed beard and intelligent eyes framed by stylish minimalist glasses, was headed for a cybersecurity conference. He was a keynote speaker, a leader in ethical hacking and digital defense, a man whose intellect was sought by corporations and even government agencies. Today, however, he was just another passenger, eager to settle in with his noise-cancelling headphones and review his presentation notes. He carried a sleek professional laptop bag and a small carry-on dressed in smart casuals, dark chinos, a collared shirt under a lightweight merino sweater. Nothing that screamed threat, unless threat to outdated security paradigms, counted. As boarding for Global Air Flight 714 commenced, Elijah joined Zone 2. He found his window seat 14A, stowed his carry-on, and settled in. He pulled out his laptop, a high-end machine stickers from past tech conferences. He needed to run through his slides one last time, a complex presentation involving simulated network intrusion graphics and lines of Python code he'd written to demonstrate vulnerabilities. Across the aisle in 14D sat Susan Miller. Middle-aged, with tightly permed blonde hair and a face etched with a permanent frown of mild anxiety, Susan was not a good flyer. Every bump, every unfamiliar sound sent jolts of adrenaline through her. She clutched a well-worn self-help book titled Conquering Your Flight Fears, though its pages seemed to offer little solace. Her gaze, already darting nervously around the cabin, snagged on Elijah. It wasn't an overtly hostile stare, not initially. It was the look of someone cataloging assessing. She saw a black man. She saw a laptop with what looked to her untrained eye like complicated, perhaps foreign symbols and rapidly changing screens. He was typing quickly, occasionally looking around the cabin. Her fear, already simmering, began to latch onto him as a focal point. Why is he looking around like that? What's on that screen? It doesn't look like emails or a movie. Elijah, engrossed in his work, was oblivious. He was tracing data flow diagrams, ensuring his animated exploits ran smoothly. To an outsider, especially one primed for suspicion, his focused intensity, the rapid switching between windows, the complex code snippets could indeed look inscrutable. Susan nudged her husband, Mark, a portly man, already engrossed in a car magazine. "Mark," she whispered a little too loudly, "look at that man, across the aisle. What do you think he's doing?" Mark glanced up, saw Elijah typing and grunted. "Working probably, Susan, like half the plane." "No, it looks weird," she insisted, her voice tight. "He keeps looking up, scanning. And that screen, it's not normal." Elijah, sensing movement, or perhaps the intensity of a stare, briefly looked up. His eyes met Susan's for a fraction of a second. He offered a polite, almost imperceptible nod and returned to his screen. For Susan, this was confirmation. He saw me looking. He knows I'm onto him. Her heart rate quickened. The benign nod transformed in her mind into a veiled acknowledgement of something sinister. She began to fidget, her breath shallowing. She craned her neck, trying to get a better look at Elijah's screen, her movements becoming more agitated. Other passengers nearby started to notice her unease. Elijah, meanwhile, was deep in a complex debugging sequence. He muttered softly to himself, "Know that kernel extension won't load, unless I bypass the integrity check." There. He typed a few more commands, a small frown of concentration on his face. To Susan, who only caught snippets, it sounded like kernel, bypass, integrity, exploit. The words, stripped of context, painted a terrifying picture in her fear-addled mind. She fumbled for the call button, her hand trembling. Brenda, a senior flight attendant with a stern demeanor and 20 years of service, arrived. Brenda prided herself on running a tight ship, and her tolerance for ambiguity was notoriously low. "Yes, ma'am. Is everything all right?" Brenda asked, her voice professionally smooth, but with an underlying edge of impatience. Susan leaned in her voice, a conspiratorial, shaky whisper. "That man," she said, gesturing not so subtly towards Elijah. "He's acting very suspiciously. He's on some kind of strange website or program with weird symbols, and I heard him muttering about bypassing things and exploiting integrity." Brenda's eyes flicked to Elijah. She saw a black man engrossed in a laptop. Her mind, perhaps unconsciously, tapped into a reservoir of societal biases, however small or unacknowledged. The passengers' fear the charged words like bypass and exploit clicked into a pre-formed narrative of potential threat. Protocol dictated she investigate, but her approach was already colored by the accuser's panic. "I see," Brenda said, her professional smile tightening. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I'll look into it." She walked over to Elijah. "Sir," she began, her voice louder than necessary, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "I'm going to need to ask you what you're working on." Elijah looked up, surprised by the abrupt interruption and the accusatory tone. "I'm sorry. Your laptop, sir. What is that you're doing?" The surrounding passengers were now openly staring. Conversations died down. A thick, uncomfortable silence began to fill the cabin, punctuated only by the low hum of the auxiliary power unit. Elijah felt a flush of bewildered anger. Elijah, a man accustomed to explaining complex technical concepts, found himself momentarily speechless, not because of the question itself, but because of the palpable shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Heads were turned. Eyes ranging from curious to fearful were fixed on him. The flight attendant, Brenda, stood with her arms crossed, an expression of stern expectation on her face. Susan Miller was visibly pale, clutching her husband's arm and staring at Elijah as if he were a ticking bomb. "I'm a cybersecurity consultant." Elijah began, his voice calm but firm, trying to project professionalism over the rising tide of unease. "I'm reviewing my presentation for a conference in Miami. It involves network schematics and code samples." He gestured vaguely towards his screen, which currently displayed a particularly intricate diagram of a distributed denial-of-service attack model. To Brenda, whose technical knowledge extended to rebooting the in-flight entertainment system, his explanation sounded like jargon-laden obfuscation. "Code samples, network schematics, sir. That sounds highly technical and potentially sensitive for an airplane environment." Elijah blinked. "It's my job. It's all perfectly legitimate. It's for a presentation on preventing cyber attacks, ironically." Brenda was unmoved. "I'm going to need you to close your laptop, sir. Now." Her voice brooked no argument. A murmur rippled through the nearby seats. Elijah felt a surge of indignation. He was being treated like a criminal based on the paranoid whispers of an ignorant passenger and the snap judgment of a flight attendant. "With all due respect," he said, keeping his tone even, "I'm not doing anything wrong or against airline policy. I'm simply working." "Sir." Brenda said, her voice rising in volume and pitch, "Your activities are causing concern to other passengers, and frankly to me. If you don't comply, I'll have to escalate this." "Escalate what?" Elijah asked, genuinely baffled, but also growing increasingly frustrated. "My work, because someone doesn't understand it." He looked around, hoping for some sign of support, but most passengers were either avoiding eye contact or looking at him with suspicion mirroring Susan Miller's. Fear, once planted, was a fast-growing weed. "Your work," Brenda said, almost sneering the word, "involves terms that are alarming. I heard bypass, exploit. That's not appropriate conversation or activity on an aircraft." Susan Miller, emboldened by the flight attendant's stance, chimed in from across the aisle, her voice quavering, but righteous. I heard him. He was looking around, suspiciously, too." Elijah turned his gaze to Susan, a look of profound disappointment crossing his face. "Ma'am, you've completely misunderstood. I was debugging my presentation software. Those are technical terms." "That's what they all say," Susan retorted, shrinking back slightly as if he might lash out. Brenda stepped closer to Elijah. "Sir, this is your final warning. Close the laptop, or I will inform the captain, and we will have security meet you." Elijah knew he was in an impossible situation. Arguing further would only make him look more suspicious to the already biased audience. With a slow, deliberate movement, he saved his work and closed the lid of his laptop. The soft click echoed in the suddenly quiet cabin. "Thank you," Brenda said curtly. She then turned and walked towards the front of the plane, presumably to the cockpit. The atmosphere remained thick with tension. Elijah could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him. He leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes, trying to process the absurdity and the humiliation of it all. He'd flown hundreds of times, laptop in tow, working on far more sensitive material than this particular presentation. Never had he encountered such a hostile, accusatory environment. The only variable that seemed different today, he thought with a sinking feeling, was the acute nervousness of one passenger and the apparent willingness of the flight crew to validate those fears without question, especially when directed at someone who looked like him. Minutes ticked by. The cabin door remained open. Passengers began to grumble, wondering about the delay. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and authoritative, yet with an undercurrent that signaled something was amiss. "Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the delay. We are currently addressing a minor security concern on board. Please remain in your seats. We appreciate your patience and will update you shortly." Security concern. The words ricocheted through the cabin. Eyes immediately swiveled back to Elijah. He was now in the minds of many the confirmed security concern. He could hear hushed, agitated whispers. They should just take him off. What was he doing? I knew there was something shifty about him. Elijah opened his eyes, his expression unreadable. He met the stares with a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate some and perhaps chasten others. He wouldn't break. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. Brenda returned this time, accompanied by 2 uniformed gate agents. Her face was grim. "Sir," she said to Elijah, avoiding his eyes now, "the captain has made the decision based on my report and passenger concerns that you will need to deplane and speak with ground security." "You're removing me from the flight?" Elijah asked, his voice dangerously low. "Because I was working on my laptop. It's for the safety and comfort of all passengers, sir," one of the gate agents recited, as if from a script. "Please gather your belongings." "This is outrageous," Elijah stated, not loudly, but with a conviction that carried. "This is profiling. Sir, if you don't cooperate, we will have to involve Port Authority police," the other gate agent said, his hand moving instinctively towards his belt. Elijah knew he had no choice but to comply lest the situation escalate into something even uglier. Slowly, he reached up and retrieved his carry-on from the overhead bin. As he moved to exit the row, passengers visibly recoiled. He walked down the aisle, the walk of shame, imposed not by any wrongdoing, but by prejudice and fear. Every eye was on him. He could feel the burn of their judgment. As he reached the aircraft door, he saw them waiting on the jet bridge, 2 figures in dark suits, their expressions serious badges clipped to their jackets. Homeland Security. The accusation born of ignorance and amplified by bias had now reached federal levels. Dr. Elijah Vance, cybersecurity expert, was about to be interrogated as a potential threat, all because he was a black man working on his laptop on a plane. The irony was a bitter pill. His plane wasn't just delayed. It felt like his life was being grounded. The jet bridge felt like a sterile tunnel, stripping away the normal sounds of the airport, amplifying the gravity of the situation. The 2 Homeland Security agents, a man and a woman, introduced themselves as Agent Miller. No relation to Susan, a fact that would later prove a grimly ironic footnote, and Agent Davies. Agent Miller was tall, stern-faced, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Agent Davies was younger, with a more analytical expression, her gaze sharp but less overtly accusatory. "Dr. Vance." Agent Miller began, his voice flat. "We need you to come with us. We have some questions." It wasn't a request. Elijah, still reeling from the public humiliation, but determined to maintain his composure, nodded. "I understand, though I believe this is a profound misunderstanding." They led him not to a public area, but down a series of utilitarian corridors, the kind passengers never see until they reached a small, windowless room. It contained a bare table and 3 chairs. It was stark functional and designed for one-purpose interrogation. "Please have a seat, Dr. Vance," Agent Davies said, her tone more neutral than Miller's. "Place your laptop and phone on the table." Elijah complied, setting his high-performance laptop, now a piece of damning evidence in their eyes, and his smartphone down. The whir of the ventilation system was the only sound for a moment. Agent Miller sat opposite him, leaning forward slightly. "All right, Dr. Vance, let's start from the beginning. What were you doing on that laptop that caused such alarm to passengers and crew?" Elijah took a deep breath. He had to be methodical, clear. "I am a keynote speaker at the Secure Horizons Cybersecurity Conference in Miami. My presentation is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. I was reviewing my slides, running through some demonstrations, and debugging some Python scripts related to my presentation." "Cybersecurity." Agent Miller raised an eyebrow. "What kind of cybersecurity? Ethical hacking, vulnerability assessment, network defense protocols. My topic is proactive threat mitigation in cloud architecture." Agent Davies was taking notes. "You mentioned bypass and exploit. Those words were specifically reported." "Yes," Elijah affirmed. Those are standard technical terms in my field. I was explaining to myself, or rather, thinking aloud about a sequence in one of my simulated demonstrations. For instance, to show how a poorly configured system can be compromised, one might demonstrate bypassing a weak security layer or exploiting a known vulnerability. The purpose is to teach how to prevent such things. So you simulate attacks, Miller pressed. Yes, that's a core part of cybersecurity research and education. You have to understand offensive techniques to build effective defenses. Elijah tried to keep the frustration from his voice. He was explaining his profession, his expertise to people who seemed determined to see it as nefarious. "Can you show us this presentation?" Agent Davies asked, gesturing to the laptop. "Of course," Elijah said. "It's all there." Agent Davies looked at Agent Miller, who gave a curt nod. "Okay, Dr. Vance. Power it up." Slowly. Elijah opened the laptop. The agents watched his every move. He booted it up, entered his password, and opened his presentation software. The slide he'd been on, when accosted, appeared a complex network diagram with arrows indicating data flow and potential breach points. "This is one of the slides," Elijah explained. "It illustrates how a DDoS attack can be launched by exploiting unsecured IoT devices. The bypass I might have mentioned could refer to bypassing an outdated firewall rule in this simulation. The exploit would be the known vulnerability in the IoT device firmware." He then navigated to a section containing Python code. "And this is a script I wrote. It's a proof of concept to demonstrate how a specific type of malware encrypts files. Again, for educational purposes, to show how ransomware works so companies can better protect themselves." Agent Davies leaned closer to the screen, her eyes scanning the code. She wasn't a coder, but she had a basic understanding of technical concepts from her training. "This looks highly specialized." "It is," Elijah agreed. "I have been in this field for over 15 years. I have 2 doctorates, one in computer science and one in cryptography." Agent Miller remained skeptical. "Anyone can say they're a cybersecurity expert, Dr. Vance. How do we know this isn't a cover, that this presentation isn't a disguise for something else?" Elijah felt a cold anger rise within him, but he suppressed it. "You can verify my credentials easily. Check the Secure Horizons conference website. I'm listed as a keynote speaker. You can contact my university, MIT, where I'm a visiting professor. You can even check my LinkedIn profile, for heaven's sake." He paused. "Or you could look at the contents of my work, which is entirely about preventing the kind of activity you seem to be accusing me of planning." "We'll be doing all of that, Dr. Vance," Agent Miller said. "In the meantime, your flight has departed without you." The words, though expected, landed heavily. His carefully planned schedule, his professional commitments, all thrown into disarray because of fear and prejudice. "Agent Davies," Miller said, "run his name. Full background check. Check with TSA FBI watch lists, everything. And get someone from our cyber division to look at this presentation." Agent Davies nodded and stepped out of the room with Elijah's phone and the details from his driver's license, which they'd requested. Elijah was left alone with Agent Miller, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "You understand why we have to take this seriously, Dr. Vance," Miller said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. "We live in a dangerous world. We can't afford to ignore potential threats, especially on airplanes." "I understand the need for security, Agent Miller," Elijah replied, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "I've dedicated my life to it. What I don't understand is why my legitimate work, my very presence, is interpreted as a threat. Would we be having this conversation if I looked different? If I were working on a spreadsheet full of sales figures?" Miller's expression didn't change. Our job is to respond to credible reports of suspicious activity. The flight attendant and a passenger made those reports. Credible, Elijah scoffed. Based on what ignorance of technical language? A passenger's anxiety is that the threshold now for grounding someone and subjecting them to this. Before Miller could respond, Agent Davies returned. She looked different. There was a new alertness in her eyes, a hint of something unexpected. "Agent Miller," she said, "Dr. Vance's credentials check out. He is indeed a keynote speaker at that conference. MIT confirms his association. His background is completely clean. No flags anywhere." Miller absorbed this, his stern demeanor faltering slightly. "Furthermore," Davies continued, "I had a quick chat with a contact in our cyber crimes unit. I described the nature of the presentation files Dr. Vance showed us. My contact said, and I quote, 'If that's what he's working on, he's one of the good guys. That's standard stuff for high-level cybersecurity analysis.'" She paused, then added, "My contact also asked if Dr. Vance was perhaps flying Global Air or its parent company, because there have been some industry whispers about their aging digital infrastructure being vulnerable. He said someone like Dr. Vance might actually be trying to help them, or at least warn them indirectly through his conference." A stunned silence filled the room. Elijah looked from Davies to Miller. The irony was almost too much to bear. He was being interrogated as a threat, while his very expertise was in protecting systems like the one operated by the airline that had just ejected him. Agent Miller cleared his throat. "Well, this certainly puts a different perspective on things." He looked at Elijah, a flicker of something unreadable, respect, embarrassment, in his eyes. "Dr. Vance, it appears there may have been a significant overreaction." The understatement of the year, Elijah thought, but he merely nodded, waiting. The power dynamic in the room had subtly shifted. He was no longer just the accused. He was the expert, whose knowledge suddenly seemed very relevant, not just to a conference, but perhaps to the very people who had wronged him. The air in the small interrogation room, once thick with suspicion, now crackled with a different kind of tension, the awkward energy of dawning realization. Agent Miller, a man clearly accustomed to being in control, looked uncomfortable. Agent Davies, however, seemed intrigued, her analytical mind already piecing together the unfortunate sequence of events. "So de Vance," Agent Davies began, her tone now markedly more respectful. "Your presentation, it details vulnerabilities." "Yes, and methods to exploit them for educational purposes." "Precisely," Elijah confirmed. "To teach defense, you must illustrate the offense. It's like teaching someone to recognize a counterfeit bill by showing them the telltale signs." "The airline involved here, Global Air," Davies continued, glancing at her notes. "You're not by any chance doing any consultancy work for them, are you?" Elijah permitted himself a wry smile. "No, I am not. Though ironically a few years ago my firm submitted a proposal to their parent company Transcontinental Airways for a comprehensive security audit. They declined, citing budgetary constraints and confidence in their existing systems." Agent Miller shifted in his chair. "Confidence which might be misplaced." "I wouldn't know specifics without an audit," Elijah said carefully. "But the airline industry, like many legacy industries, often struggles with modernizing its cybersecurity infrastructure. They have complex, interconnected systems, booking flight operations, maintenance, passenger data. Many of these were built decades ago and have been layered with new technologies which can create unforeseen vulnerabilities." Agent Davies tapped her pen on her notepad. "The flight attendant Brenda Milligan and the passenger Susan Miller mentioned your demeanor looking around the cabin, muttering to yourself. I was concentrating. Elijah explained, the frustration still evident in his voice. Sometimes I talk through complex problems. As for looking around, it was probably just breaking concentration for a moment, a habit. Certainly not casing the plane for whatever they imagined. He shook his head. The leap from a man working on a laptop to a national security threat is staggering. Fear is a powerful catalyst, Dr. Vance, Agent Miller said, a touch of weariness in his voice. Especially in a post-9/11 world on an airplane. Combine that with a lack of understanding. And prejudice, Elijah interjected quietly, holding Miller's gaze. Miller didn't flinch, but he didn't deny it either. That too, potentially. Implicit bias is something all agencies, including ours, are trying to address. A statement that sounded practiced, but perhaps held a kernel of truth. There was a moment of silence. Elijah then had a thought, a way to perhaps turn this frustrating, humiliating experience into something more. A way to demonstrate his value, not just argue for his innocence. "Agents," he began, "while I was being unceremoniously escorted from the aircraft, and during my brief wait in the boarding area, before that, I noticed something." Both agents leaned in. "What did you notice?" Davies asked. "The airport's public Wi-Fi network, specifically the captive portal for global air passengers at Gate B32. It's running on a very outdated SSL certificate. Moreover, the redirection script from the initial connection to the login page has a potential flaw. It looks like it could be susceptible to a man-in-the-middle attack if someone were so inclined, potentially harvesting login credentials or redirecting users to a malicious site." Miller and Davies exchanged a look. This was new. This was specific. "Are you certain?" Miller asked. "I didn't have time to run a full diagnostic, obviously," Elijah said dryly. "I was a bit preoccupied, but the signature of the vulnerability is fairly common with older portal authenticators. It's something I cover in my advanced seminars. If someone with the right skills and intent were on that same public Wi-Fi, they could theoretically intercept data from unsuspecting passengers logging in." Agent Davies was already typing furiously on her own secure device, likely querying databases or alerting their cyber team. "A man in the middle on the airport Wi-Fi, that's serious." "It's not a flaw in the plane's avionics," Elijah clarified. "It's the ground-based passenger Wi-Fi portal at that specific gate, seemingly linked to Global Air's network access. But it's indicative of potentially lax security practices. If they're overlooking something this basic in their passenger-facing systems." He left the implication hanging. Agent Miller stood up and paced the small room. "So while we're investigating you as a phantom threat, based on a misunderstanding, you identify a real potential vulnerability in the airport's infrastructure. Life is not without its ironies," Elijah said. Agent Davies looked up from her device. "Sir, our cyber team confirms that particular Wi-Fi access point has been flagged internally for an overdue security update. They hadn't identified that specific vulnerability you've described, but they agree it's plausible given the outdated architecture. They're initiating a priority alert for Hartsfield-Jackson's IT department now." The atmosphere in the room had now completely transformed. Elijah was no longer the suspect. He was an unexpected asset, a high-level expert who had stumbled into their jurisdiction under the worst possible circumstances and still managed to provide critical intelligence. Agent Miller stopped pacing. He looked at Elijah, a new respect in his eyes. "Dr. Vance, on behalf of Homeland Security, I want to offer you our sincere apologies for this situation. It seems clear that your removal from Flight 714 was unwarranted based on misinterpretations and an overabundance of caution that unfortunately targeted you unfairly." "I appreciate that, Agent Miller," Elijah said. But an apology, while welcome, didn't undo the public humiliation, the missed flight, the disrupted conference presentation. "We will ensure that your statement regarding the Wi-Fi vulnerability is passed on with full credit to you," Davies added. "This could prevent a lot of people from having their data compromised." "That would be good," Elijah acknowledged. "At least some positive outcome." "We'll also need to file a comprehensive report on this incident," Miller continued, "including the actions of the Global Air flight crew. There are protocols for handling suspicious passengers, and it seems those may not have been followed appropriately. There should have been more discretion, more attempts to de-escalate and clarify before jumping to removal and involving us." Elijah thought of Brenda's accusatory tone, Susan Miller's fearful eyes. There was no attempt to understand, only to accuse. "We will arrange for your travel to Miami on the next available flight, at our expense, of course," Agent Miller stated. "And we will provide a liaison to ensure there are no further complications with your travel today." He also assured Elijah they would take a formal statement from him regarding his experience, which could be used if he chose to file a formal complaint against the airline. As they prepared to leave the interrogation room, no longer as captor and captive, but as professionals who had navigated a bizarre and troubling incident, Elijah felt a strange mixture of exhaustion, vindication, and a lingering sense of anger. He had been wronged, his dignity assaulted. But in a strange twist, his expertise, the very thing that had been misconstrued as a threat, had not only cleared his name, but had also potentially helped avert a different kind of crisis. The plane he was supposed to be on Flight 714 had long since departed. But Dr. Elijah Vance, the suspicious black passenger, had inadvertently grounded a far more insidious threat, a vulnerability in the digital fabric of the airport itself. The irony was as sharp as it was profound. The real drama, however, was far from over. The karma was still waiting in the wings, preparing for its own departure. Emerging from the sterile confines of the Homeland Security substation, felt like stepping back into a world that had subtly, yet irrevocably, shifted. Agent Davies personally escorted Elijah, a gesture that spoke volumes about the turnaround in his status. The fluorescent lights of the concourse seemed harsher now, the faces of passers-by more scrutinized in Elijah's mind. "We've booked you on Global Air Flight 988, departing for Miami in 3 hours from Gate C12, Agent Davies explained, handing him a new boarding pass and a voucher for refreshments. "Agent Miller is currently on a call with Global Air's corporate security director and the station manager here at ATL. He's expressing our concerns regarding this incident in no uncertain terms." Elijah nodded, still processing the whirlwind. "And what about Flight 741? "The passengers. The crew. They landed in Miami about an hour ago," Davies said. "As far as they know, a security concern was handled and the flight continued. They have no idea about the Wi-Fi vulnerability you identified. That's being handled discreetly by airport IT and our cyber team to prevent wider panic or exploitation." Discreetly. Elijah understood the necessity, but a part of him wished the passengers on Flight 714, especially Susan Miller and Brenda the flight attendant, could know the full story, could understand the depth of their misjudgment. Agent Davies led him to a quiet lounge area, reserved for government officials or those under their temporary ward. "Please wait here, Dr. Vance. Someone from Global Air will be coming to speak with you. We've strongly suggested it." Elijah sat, the adrenaline finally beginning to ebb, leaving behind a profound weariness. He pulled out his phone, the one Agent Davies had returned, and saw a slew of missed calls and texts from the conference organizers, wondering where he was. He quickly sent a message explaining a significant travel disruption, but assuring them he was en route and would still make his keynote, albeit with less preparation time. About 20 minutes later, a flustered-looking man in a slightly rumpled Global Air uniform name tag, identifying him as David Chen, Assistant Station Manager, approached. He was visibly nervous, clutching a tablet. "Dr. Vance?" he asked tentatively. Elijah looked up. "Yes." "Mr. Chen, I'm Agent Davies, Department of Homeland Security." Davies interjected smoothly, establishing the official weight behind this meeting. Chen swallowed his eyes, darting between Elijah and Agent Davies. "Dr. Vance, on behalf of Global Air, we want to extend our sincerest apologies for the misunderstanding on Flight 714 this morning." He sounded like he was reading from a mental script prepared hastily. "A misunderstanding." Elijah repeated, his voice quiet but edged with steel. "Miss Chen, I was publicly humiliated, accused of being a threat, and removed from your aircraft by armed personnel because one of your flight attendants and a passenger decided my ethnicity and my professional work were suspicious. That's a bit more than a misunderstanding." Chen paled. "Yes, well, the reports I've received, it seems things escalated very quickly. Flight attendant Milligan believed she was acting in the interest of safety. By validating baseless paranoia," Elijah countered, "without any attempt at discreet inquiry. By announcing to the cabin that I was a security concern. Does Global Air not train its staff in de-escalation or in recognizing what actual suspicious behavior looks like, versus a black man using a laptop? We do have extensive training, Dr. Vance, I assure you," Chen said, though his voice lacked conviction. "And we will be reviewing this incident thoroughly. Flight attendant Milligan has been reassigned pending a full internal investigation, as has the purser who was her direct supervisor on that flight. Reassigned. Not fired. Not yet, anyway." Elijah wondered what that truly meant. A slap on the wrist, a few days on the ground. "And the passenger who initiated this?" Elijah asked. "Mrs. Susan Miller." Chen looked down at his tablet. "We are limited in what we can do regarding passengers unless they violate federal aviation regulations. However, her name has been noted in our internal system. Any future travel with us will involve enhanced scrutiny at check-in and boarding." A vague and ultimately unsatisfying response. "Dr. Vance," Chen continued, forcing a more confident tone, "Global Air is prepared to offer you a full refund for your original ticket, of course, and as a gesture of our profound regret, we'd like to offer you 50,000 frequent flyer miles and a travel voucher for $500 applicable to any future Global Air flight." Elijah stared at him. Miles and a voucher. The standard corporate apology for a lost bag or a lengthy tarmac delay. Not for an experience that had left him feeling profiled and dehumanized. "Mr. Chen," Elijah said slowly, "what I experienced today isn't something that can be compensated with frequent flyer miles. This isn't about a delayed flight. This is about systemic issues, bias, a failure of judgment at multiple levels." Agent Davies stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Chen, DHS, will also be submitting a formal inquiry to Global Air regarding its crew training protocols for identifying and managing perceived security threats. Dr. Vance's experience raises serious questions." Chen looked like he wished the ground would swallow him. "Yes, of course, Agent Davies. We will cooperate fully. Dr. Vance, again, we are truly sorry. We hope you will accept our apology and these tokens of our regret." Elijah knew pressing Chen further was pointless. He was a messenger, likely with limited authority. The real battle, if Elijah chose to fight it, would be with Global Air, corporate, with their legal team, with their PR department. "I acknowledge your apology, Mr. Chen," Elijah said, choosing his words carefully. "As for your offer, I'll consider it. Right now, my priority is to get to Miami and salvage what's left of my professional commitments." Chen nodded, relieved. "Understandable. Your new flight 988 will begin boarding in about 2 hours. We've arranged for pre-boarding for you if you wish, and your luggage has been transferred." "Thank you." Elijah said a dismissal more than an expression of gratitude. Chen, after a few more awkward platitudes, practically fled. Once he was gone, Agent Davies turned to Elijah. "Not exactly a profile in courage, that man." Elijah sighed. "He's just a cog in the machine. The machine itself is the problem." He looked at Davies. "Thank you, Agent Davies, for your professionalism and for listening." "It's our job to get to the truth, Dr. Vance," she replied. "Sometimes the path is just muddier than usual. I've also taken the liberty of getting the full name and seat number of Ms. Susan Miller from the original flight manifest, should your legal counsel wish to have it." She handed him a small, folded piece of paper, a small but significant piece of ammunition. The wheels of karma were beginning to turn slowly but surely. Elijah had been wronged, but he was not broken, and he had a feeling this was far from over. While Elijah was en route to Miami on Global Air Flight 988, a flight where he was treated with an almost comical level of deference by a cabin crew clearly briefed on his VIP, read, "Do not antagonize" status, the digital world was beginning to churn. It started subtly. Another passenger on Flight 714, a young travel blogger named Chloe Park, who had been seated a few rows behind Elijah, had discreetly filmed portions of the initial confrontation with Brenda and Elijah's subsequent removal. She hadn't understood the context, only the visible drama, a black man working on his laptop being singled out and then escorted off the plane by security just before the captain announced a security concern. Once Flight 714 landed in Miami and the Wi-Fi signals reconnected, Chloe, sensing a story, uploaded a short, heavily edited clip to her TikTok and Twitter accounts. Her caption, "Drama on Global Air, Hanhand, Flight 714, ATL MIA, passenger, escorted off by security after suspicious activity on laptop. Plane delayed." What was he doing? Global Air, at airline drama, was flying while black. The #flying while black hashtag, unfortunately evergreen, immediately caught traction. The initial comments were a mix of speculation and outrage. What did he do? Details. Global Air being shady again. Probably nothing. Bet he was just a black man trying to exist. Flight attendants on a power trip. By the time Elijah landed in Miami, greeted by an apologetic but relieved conference organizer, Chloe's video had a few thousand views and was starting to be shared by larger accounts. Agent Davies, true to her word, had also discreetly released a de-identified summary of the incident to a trusted aviation news outlet, emphasizing that DHS had found no threat, and that the passenger was an esteemed expert in a technical field whose work was misinterpreted. She couldn't name Elijah or the specifics of the Wi-Fi vulnerability due to ongoing procedures, but the implication was clear: the airline had messed up. The aviation blog ran a story: Global Air passenger removed after suspicious laptop activity. DHS finds no threat, raises questions about crew response. This lent credibility to the burgeoning social media narrative. People started connecting Chloe's video with the blog post. Elijah's name wasn't public yet, but the description of an esteemed expert whose work was misinterpreted, combined with the video of a well-dressed black man being calmly escorted off, painted a damning picture for global air. Elijah, meanwhile, was racing to his hotel trying to decompress and prepare for his keynote, which was now just hours away. He was unaware of the growing storm. Back at Global Air headquarters and at Hartsfield-Jackson, panic was setting in. The airline's social media team was bombarded. Their initial generic responses, "Global Air takes security seriously, and we are reviewing the incident," were being ratioed into oblivion. The karma for Susan Miller began subtly but corrosively. Her full name wasn't out yet, but Chloe Park's video, though not focused on her, caught glimpses of a panicked blonde woman gesturing and speaking with the flight attendant. Amateur online sleuths with too much time started trying to identify the accuser. Someone on the flight who knew Susan peripherally from a neighborhood group recognized her. They didn't dox her, but they messaged a popular social justice influencer. "I was on that flight. The woman who complained is Susan Miller from City State. She's always been a bit extra." The influencer, with hundreds of thousands of followers, posted a blind item. "Hearing the passenger who caused the Global Air Hanshard Flight 714 fiasco by baselessly accusing a black man is a Karen from City State. Apparently her fear is everyone else's problem." Hatched Global Air fail. Susan Miller, blissfully unaware in her Miami hotel room, was about to have her vacation and her reputation ruined. Her local community Facebook groups would soon be buzzing. For Brenda Milligan, the flight attendant, the internal investigation at Global Air was swift and brutal, especially with DHS breathing down their necks. Her reassignment became a suspension without pay. Her colleagues, initially sympathetic, started distancing themselves when the #flying. While Black hashtag gained prominence and the details of Elijah's profession emerged. Whispers of racially motivated to career-ending mistake began to circulate among the flight crews. Her union representative told her to keep a low profile, but the damage was spreading. Her perfect service record was now indelibly stained. She'd prided herself on control and authority. Now she had neither. The most significant immediate karma, however, was reserved for Global Air itself. Their stock price, already wobbly due to those industry whispers about their outdated tech, took a noticeable dip in after-hours trading as the story gained traction. Rival airlines' social media teams were probably high-fiving, though publicly they remained silent. Elijah finally checked his phone properly after settling into his hotel. He saw a text from Agent Davies' doctor, "Vance, the situation is attracting media attention. My official statement is out, but your identity is still protected. However, a passenger filmed your removal. It's going viral. Be prepared." Elijah searched Global Air Flight 714 on Twitter. His eyes widened. He saw Chloe Park's video. He saw himself calm, but clearly under duress. He read the comments, the outrage, the support. He saw the aviation blog post. A strange feeling washed over him. The humiliation was now public, but so was the injustice. The narrative was largely on his side, even without people knowing the full ironic truth about the Wi-Fi vulnerability he'd discovered. His phone rang. It was the president of the Secure Horizons conference. "Elijah. Thank God you're here. Look, I've seen what's happening online. Are you okay, first of all? Shaken, but okay, Michael. This is unbelievable and appalling. Listen, your keynote. Do you want to address this? The theme of our conference is proactive threat mitigation. What you experienced and how your expertise was twisted, it's a hell of a real-world case study." Elijah paused. He had planned a technical talk. But this was an opportunity to not just present his work, but to highlight the human element, the biases that could undermine even the best security systems. "Yes, Michael," Elijah said, a new resolve in his voice. "I think I do want to address it. I think I need to." The stage was being set not just for a keynote, but for a reckoning. Karma wasn't just knocking, it was preparing to kick down the door. The main hall of the Secure Horizons Cybersecurity Conference was electric. Dr. Elijah Vance, already a respected figure, had become the subject of intense interest following the viral Flight 714 incident. The conference president introduced him with somber respect, noting Elijah would address the ordeal. Elijah took the stage to a sustained standing ovation. Composed but with a newfound fire in his eyes, he began, "My planned talk was on cloud architecture. But today I must address a different vulnerability: human bias, fear, and the catastrophic failure of critical judgment." He recounted the events with factual precision. The profiling by Susan Miller, unnamed by him and flight attendant Brenda Milligan, the public humiliation on the Global Air flight, and the Homeland Security interrogation. "The very work I do to protect systems," he stated, "was deemed suspicious. The tools of my trade twisted into evidence of malintent." Then he delivered the stunning twist. "While I was being detained," Elijah announced, "I identified a significant cybersecurity vulnerability in Hartsfield-Jackson Airport's public Wi-Fi, specifically affecting Global Air passengers at my gate. I reported this to Homeland Security." A collective gasp filled the hall. News crews present, due to the viral story, captured every word. "The person profiled and removed as a perceived threat," he emphasized, "was in that moment helping neutralize an actual threat." His presentation title shifted on screen to "The Human Element Bias as a System Vulnerability." He masterfully wove his experience into a powerful lecture on how prejudice corrupts human systems and how organizational cultures need constant updates to combat bias. The applause that followed was deafening, a recognition of both his resilience and profound insight. The fallout for Global Air was immediate and devastating. Elijah's articulate, damning account, amplified by the tech leaders and media present, turned their PR crisis into a catastrophe. Their stock plummeted. #boycott Global Air and #Vance keynote trended worldwide. CEO Marcus Thorne was forced into a stilted video apology promising reviews and offering Elijah a personal meeting, which now seemed woefully inadequate. Karma struck flight attendant Brenda Milligan decisively. Global Air, under immense pressure from DHS and the public, converted her suspension to termination. Her career in aviation ended, her reputation shattered. For Susan Miller, the airport Karen karma was more personal. Her identity, already circulating, became widely known after the keynote. She faced intense online shaming and real-world ostracization in her community. Her vacation ruined, she returned home to a tarnished reputation, her unfounded fear having brought about her own public humiliation. Homeland Security, via Agent Davies, issued a commendatory statement about Dr. Vance's invaluable assistance, with the Wi-Fi flaw quickly dubbed the Vance anomaly, and patched further, highlighting Global Air's missteps and announcing reviews of airline protocols. Elijah, now represented by legal counsel, made it clear his goal was not primarily financial but systemic change. The cybersecurity community rallied, and offers for him to lead initiatives on ethics and bias in tech poured in. The ordeal had been traumatic, but Elijah's principled and intelligent response had transformed him from a victim into a formidable agent of change. The world had tried to ground him, but he was now undeniably soaring. The fallout from Dr. Elijah Vance's keynote and the Global Air incident was swift and decisive, carving a new path for all involved. Elijah, through a top civil rights law firm, engaged Global Air not just for recompense, but for meaningful reform. The landmark settlement that emerged transcended mere financial compensation, much of which Elijah immediately dedicated to charities combating racial injustice and promoting diversity in STEM. Critically, it mandated the Vance Protocol, a complete overhaul of Global Air's crew training on bias and de-escalation, developed with Elijah's input. It also established an independent review board and funded a significant diversity in tech initiative. Global Air CEO Marcus Thorne, humbled, embarked on a public journey of corporate accountability. The airline's reputation was deeply scarred, a costly lesson in the price of prejudice, but the forced changes began a slow process of rebuilding trust and even improving internal morale. The instigators of Elijah's ordeal faced their own reckonings. Flight attendant Brenda Milligan's termination stood. Her career in aviation was over a stark example of unchecked authority, leading to professional ruin. Susan Miller, the passenger whose fear ignited the crisis, found her life uncomfortably altered by online infamy. The airport Karen label, though fading nationally, lingered locally, forcing a move and a difficult confrontation with her own biases. The anxiety she projected had boomeranged, leaving her to navigate a world where she now felt the sting of public judgment. For Elijah, the incident became a catalyst. His cybersecurity consultancy thrived, but his passion increasingly steered towards the confluence of technology ethics and social justice. He became a powerful voice, advocating for standardized airline protocols, mandatory implicit bias training for security personnel, and greater diversity in tech. His accidental discovery of the Vance anomaly at Hartsfield-Jackson led to broader airport Wi-Fi security improvements nationally. A year later, Elijah stood once more at Hartsfield-Jackson, not as an accused passenger, but as an honored guest speaking at the launch of their new Digital Safety and Ethical Technology initiative, a direct result of the systemic flaws his ordeal had exposed. The journey from public humiliation to respected advocate had been arduous. Yet he had not only cleared his name, but had also leveraged his grounding into a force for substantial change. The hard karma for others was less about revenge and more about the inevitable consequences of their actions, paving the way for a more just system. Elijah Vance had taken a moment of profound injustice and forged it into a lasting legacy of progress, ensuring his voice and the critical lessons learned would continue to take flight. Dr. Elijah Vance's harrowing ordeal on Global Air Flight 714 began with a whisper of suspicion and escalated into a storm of prejudice. But as you've seen, the truth has a way of taking flight. His expertise, initially a source of fear for the ignorant, became the very key to his vindication and the exposure of a real hidden threat. The hard karma that followed for the accusers and the airline wasn't just about retribution. It was about accountability and the painful, necessary lessons in bias and justice. What happened to Dr. Vance is a stark reminder of the prejudices that still exist. If his story moved you, if it made you think, please give this video a like, share it with your friends and family to spread awareness, and subscribe for more compelling, true stories of injustice and triumph. Don't forget to hit the notification bell. What are your thoughts on how this was handled? Let us know in the comments below.